My uncle tried to steal my gym from me. He didn't know I had the receipts. The voicemail hit my phone at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew before I even pressed play that my Uncle Rick was about to ruin my life. Hey kiddo, it's your uncle. Listen, I've been talking to some people downtown about that whole gym situation, and there might be some complications with your purchase. Nothing to worry about, but we should probably sit down and chat about transferring everything over to someone with more experience. You know, keep it in the family the right way. Call me back. I sat there in my small apartment above Riverside Fitness, my gym, the one I bought fair and square with Grandma Dorothy's inheritance money 6 months ago, and felt my stomach drop to the floor. The way he said complications and the right way made my skin crawl. See, when Grandma Dorothy passed last year, she left me $180,000. Not my Uncle Rick, not my dad, not any of the other relatives who barely visited her in the nursing home. Me. Because I was the one who showed up every Sunday with her favorite chocolate chip cookies from Miller's Bakery. I was the one who listened to her stories about running her own seamstress business back in the 1960s, how she'd saved every penny and invested wisely despite everyone telling her women didn't understand money. Promise me you'll do something meaningful with this, she'd whispered to me 3 days before she died, gripping my hand with surprising strength. Don't just let it sit in a bank account. Build something. So when Riverside Fitness went up for sale in February, the owner, Jim Patterson, was retiring to Florida. I saw my chance. The place was struggling, membership down to maybe 40 regular users, equipment held together with duct tape and prayers. But the location was perfect, right in the heart of downtown Millbrook where all the young professionals were moving in. The bones were good. I offered Jim $165,000 cash for everything, the building, equipment, existing membership contracts, even his old German Shepherd, Max, who'd become the unofficial gym mascot. Jim was so relieved to find a buyer who actually cared about the place that he threw in 3 months of consulting to help with the transition. My family's reaction was mixed. Dad was proud but worried I was in over my head. Mom kept asking if I was sure I didn't want to use the money for a house instead. But Uncle Rick? Uncle Rick had opinions. You're making a huge mistake, he told me at Jim's retirement party in March, beer breath hot in my face. You don't know the first thing about running a business. That place is a money pit. Thanks for the vote of confidence, I replied, trying to keep things light. I'm serious, Maya. You should have consulted with family first. Someone with actual business experience. He gestured to himself, apparently forgetting that his business experience consisted of managing a Radio Shack until it closed in 2015 and then bouncing between various sales jobs. But here's the thing about Uncle Rick, he's always been jealous of what other people have. When Dad got promoted to supervisor at the plant, Rick spent 2 years telling anyone who'd listen that it was only because of nepotism. When our cousin Sarah got into law school, he insisted the admissions process was rigged. And when Grandma Dorothy left me her inheritance instead of splitting it equally among her kids, he'd made his feelings pretty clear at the funeral reception. Now, staring at my phone in the dim light from the street lamps outside, I had a sinking feeling that Uncle Rick was about to make his move. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the stack of paperwork from the gym purchase. Every contract, every receipt, every email exchange with Jim Patterson, I'd kept it all, partially because Grandma Dorothy had drilled organization into me since I was 12, and partially because something told me I might need proof someday. At 6 a.m., I called my lawyer, Beth Martinez. We'd worked together on the gym purchase, and she'd been thorough to the point of being annoying, which suddenly felt like a blessing. Maya. It's early, even for you, Beth said, sounding alert despite the hour. Rick called last night. He's claiming there are complications with my purchase and wants me to transfer everything to him. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. What kind of complications? He didn't specify. Just said he'd been talking to people downtown and that someone with more experience should handle things. Maya, your purchase was cleaner than a whistle. I personally verified the chain of title going back 30 years. Jim Patterson had full ownership, no liens, no outstanding claims. The transfer was textbook perfect. So what could Rick be planning? I don't know, but document everything. Save that voicemail. If he contacts you again, try to get it in writing. I hung up feeling marginally better, but that relief evaporated when I got to the gym at 7 a.m. for the morning rush. Janet Morrison, one of my regulars who worked at City Hall, was waiting by the door with a concerned expression. Maya, honey, I need to tell you something, she said, glancing around nervously. Yesterday, a man came by the planning office asking questions about your business license. Said he was your uncle and there might be some issues with the ownership documentation. My blood turned to ice water. What kind of issues? He claimed that the sale might not have been legitimate, that you might not have had the legal authority to make the purchase. Complete nonsense, of course, I processed your paperwork myself. But he was very insistent, and he had this lawyer with him. Guy in an expensive suit taking notes. Did you catch the lawyer's name? Harrison something. From that big firm over in Riverside County. Harrison, Brock and Associates, I think. I'd heard of them. The kind of lawyers who charged $400 an hour and specialized in making problems for people who couldn't afford to fight back. Janet, what exactly did you tell them? The truth. That your paperwork was in perfect order and your business license was valid. But Maya. She hesitated. He asked specifically about your grandmother's inheritance. How you got the money, whether there were any disputes about the will. I told him that wasn't city business, but he seemed to know an awful lot of details already. The morning crowd was starting to arrive, Mrs. Chen for her daily water aerobics, Tom Bradley heading for the free weights, but I felt like I was underwater, watching everything happen from a distance. There's more, Janet continued quietly. After they left, I called my friend Maria in the county recorder's office. Someone's been pulling records on your property. Not just recent stuff, they requested everything going back to when the building was first constructed in 1987. I managed to unlock the door and flip on the lights, going through the motions of opening while my mind raced. Rick wasn't just making noise, he was building a case. But a case for what? The inheritance was mine legally. The property purchase was legitimate. What angle could he possibly be working? By 8 a.m., I had my answer. Rick walked through the front door with a man in a navy suit, and neither of them looked like they were there to work out. Maya, we need to talk, Rick said, his voice carrying that fake concerned tone I'd learned to hate. The man in the navy suit hung back slightly, briefcase in hand, looking like he'd stepped out of a courtroom drama. We're just opening, Rick. If you want to discuss something, call me later. I kept my voice level, but my hands were shaking as I arranged the towels at the front desk. Several members had stopped their workouts to watch, and I could feel the weight of their stares. This can't wait. He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with cigarettes. Maya, I've discovered some serious problems with your purchase. Problems that could land you in real legal trouble if we don't fix them immediately. The man in the suit finally spoke. Ms. Rivera? I'm David Harrison from Harrison, Brock and Associates. I represent your uncle in a property dispute matter. My heart hammered against my ribs. There is no property dispute. I bought this gym fair and square. Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. I'm afraid it's not that simple. We've uncovered evidence that suggests the original sale to James Patterson in 1987 may have been fraudulent. If that's the case, then Mr. Patterson never had legitimate ownership to transfer to you. That's ridiculous, I managed, but doubt was already creeping in. Why would they go back to 1987 unless they'd found something? Rick jumped in, playing the concerned family member. Maya, honey, I've been doing some digging because I was worried about you. You're so young, and business deals can be complicated. It turns out the original owner, Margaret Chen, Mrs. Chen's mother-in-law, actually, she might not have had the right to sell to Jim back in the day. I glanced over at Mrs. Chen, who was floating in the pool with her foam noodles, completely oblivious to the conversation happening 20 feet away. Her mother-in-law had owned this building. Here's what we think happened, Harrison continued, his voice smooth as oil. Margaret Chen was acting as power of attorney for her husband when she sold this property. But we have reason to believe she exceeded her authority. The power of attorney document specifically excluded real estate transactions over $50,000. This building sold for $78,000 in 1987. The folder made a soft thud as he placed it on my desk. If Margaret Chen didn't have the authority to sell, then Jim Patterson never legally owned this property. Which means he couldn't legally sell it to you. So who owns it then? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Rick's smile was predatory. Well, that's the thing. After Margaret's husband died in 1994, the property should have gone through proper probate proceedings. But it didn't, because everyone assumed the sale to Jim was legitimate. According to our research, the rightful heir would be Margaret's eldest son, that's Mrs. Chen's husband, Thomas. But here's where it gets interesting. Harrison picked up the thread seamlessly. Thomas Chen died in 2019. His will left everything to his wife, our Mrs. Chen over there. But she's 84 years old, Maya. She has early-stage dementia. She can't manage a commercial property. Fortunately, Rick said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, Thomas's will included a provision naming me as alternate executor if Mrs. Chen becomes unable to handle her affairs. I've been helping her with her finances for the past 2 years. The world tilted sideways. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. You're lying. I wish I was, kiddo. Look, I know this is hard to hear, but we can fix this. Mrs. Chen doesn't want to deal with the stress of a legal battle at her age. She's agreed to sell the property to me for exactly what you paid, $165,000. Then I'll sell it right back to you for the same amount. No harm, no foul. You get to keep your gym, Mrs. Chen gets taken care of, and everyone stays out of court. How generous of you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying to protect family here, Maya. If this goes to court, you could lose everything. The purchase money, the improvements you've made, even your business license. But if we handle it quietly, within the family, nobody gets hurt. Harrison nodded gravely. I should mention, we've already filed preliminary paperwork with the county. The clock is ticking on this, Ms. Rivera. I stared at Harrison's briefcase like it contained a bomb. What kind of preliminary paperwork? A formal challenge to the title transfer, Harrison replied smoothly. Standard procedure when ownership irregularities are discovered. The county has to investigate before any further transactions can be processed. My mouth went dry. What does that mean for my business? Rick stepped closer, his hand reaching toward my shoulder in what I'm sure he thought was a comforting gesture. I stepped back. It means you can't sell, can't refinance, can't make any major changes until this gets resolved. But Maya, we can make this go away today. Right now. Mrs. Chen is waiting in my car with the paperwork. Mrs. Chen is in your car. I looked toward the windows, and sure enough, there was Rick's beat-up Chevy Impala in the parking lot. I could barely make out a small figure in the passenger seat. She wanted to handle this in person, Rick said. She feels terrible about the confusion. You know how much she loves coming here. Something about this felt wrong beyond the obvious. Mrs. Chen had been a member since before I bought the place. She came every single day, rain or shine, for her water aerobics routine. She knew my name, asked about my family, brought me homemade dumplings on holidays. If she owned this building, if there had been some problem with her mother-in-law's sale 35 years ago, wouldn't she have mentioned it? I need to talk to Mrs. Chen myself, I said. Harrison and Rick exchanged a quick glance. Of course, Rick said. But maybe we should handle the business stuff first. You know how she gets confused about financial matters. Red flag number 1000. Mrs. Chen might be 84, but she was sharp as a tack. Last week she corrected me when I accidentally charged her membership fee to the wrong account, catching a mistake I hadn't even noticed. No, I said firmly. If Mrs. Chen owns this building, I want to hear it from her directly. Before Rick could object, I walked past both of them toward the front door. Several of my members were openly staring now, including Tom Bradley, who'd abandoned his workout to lean against the water fountain with his arms crossed. Tom was a retired cop, and the expression on his face suggested he didn't like what he was seeing. Outside, Rick's car was running with the windows down. Mrs. Chen sat in the passenger seat wearing her usual purple windbreaker, but something was off. She looked smaller than normal, hunched over, and when I approached the window, her eyes seemed unfocused. Mrs. Chen. It's Maya. How are you feeling today? She looked up at me with a confused smile. Oh, hello dear. Are we at the gym? I thought I was supposed to do my exercises today. Yes, we're at the gym. Mrs. Chen, do you remember your mother-in-law, Margaret? The one who owned this building a long time ago. Her face went blank. Margaret? There was a Margaret. She made good soup. Rick appeared at my elbow. Maya, don't confuse her with too many questions. She's having a difficult day. But something in Mrs. Chen's eyes sharpened suddenly, like a cloud passing away from the sun. Wait. Maya. You're the nice girl who brings me extra towels. Why am I in this car? I need to do my water exercises. The doctor says I must do them every day for my arthritis. Mrs. Chen, I said gently, crouching down to her eye level, this man says you own the gym building. Is that true? She looked genuinely puzzled. Own it? No, dear. I just swim there. I pay my monthly fee like everyone else. $35. Very reasonable. She glanced around nervously. Why am I not in the pool? Thomas always drives me, but Thomas is. Her face crumpled slightly. Thomas died. I remember now. Rick's hand clamped down on my arm. That's enough, Maya. Can't you see you're upsetting her? But I was seeing something else entirely. Mrs. Chen wasn't confused about owning the building, she was confused about why she was in Rick's car instead of doing her daily routine. The confusion wasn't dementia, it was situational. Mrs. Chen, how did you get here today? Did Rick pick you up from home? I think so. He said there were papers to sign. Important papers about Thomas. Her voice got smaller. I don't like signing papers. They're always so confusing. Harrison cleared his throat behind us. Ms. Rivera, we really need to move forward with this today. Mrs. Chen has already agreed to the terms, and frankly, the longer we wait, the more complicated this becomes for everyone. I stood up slowly, a cold certainty settling in my chest. Rick wasn't just trying to steal my gym. He was using a vulnerable elderly woman to do it. I looked Rick straight in the eye and made a decision that would change everything. Mrs. Chen, would you like to come inside and do your water exercises while we sort this out? Oh yes, please, she said, brightening immediately. I'm already late. I usually start at 8:30. Maya, that's not necessary, Rick started, but I was already helping Mrs. Chen out of the car. Actually, it is necessary. If we're going to discuss property ownership, Mrs. Chen should be comfortable and in familiar surroundings. I kept my voice level, but my phone was already out. Tom. Could you help Mrs. Chen get settled in the pool area? Tom Bradley appeared instantly, his retired cop instincts clearly pinging. Of course. Mrs. Chen, let's get you inside where it's warm. As Tom gently guided her toward the building, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Chen's purse was still in Rick's car, along with what looked like a thick manila envelope. When people sign important documents willingly, they usually keep the paperwork with them. Harrison was checking his watch with obvious irritation. Ms. Rivera, we have other appointments today. Mrs. Chen has already reviewed all the documentation and given her consent. When? When did she review it? Rick jumped in. Yesterday evening. I went over everything with her at her house. She understands the situation perfectly. Funny thing about that, I said, pulling out my phone. Mrs. Chen called me yesterday at 7 p.m. asking if she could come in early today because she missed her afternoon swim. She was worried about her routine getting disrupted. The look that passed between Rick and Harrison was worth 1,000 words. She called you. Rick's voice had lost its concerned uncle tone. She calls every few weeks when something changes her schedule. Yesterday she said she'd been feeling anxious all day but couldn't remember why. Does that sound like someone who just agreed to a major property transaction? I scrolled through my call log and hit speaker. Mrs. Chen's voicemail from yesterday played clearly. Maya dear, it's Mrs. Chen. I'm sorry to bother you, but I missed my swimming today and I feel all mixed up. Can I come early tomorrow? I had some visitors today and now I can't stop thinking about Thomas. They wanted me to sign something, but I told them I needed to ask my daughter first. Anyway, see you tomorrow for my exercises. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds. Harrison recovered first, his lawyer training kicking in. Mrs. Chen is clearly experiencing some confusion about the timeline. That's exactly why we need to handle these matters quickly, before her condition deteriorates further. Or, I said, my voice getting stronger, she's not confused at all. She remembers exactly what happened, and she told you she needed to ask her daughter first. Rick's face was turning red. Maya, you're being ridiculous. Mrs. Chen doesn't have the capacity to make these decisions on her own anymore. Says who? Has she been declared incompetent by a court? Does she have a legal guardian? She has me, Rick snapped. I told you, I'm the alternate executor. For her deceased husband's estate. That doesn't give you power of attorney over her personal decisions. I looked directly at Harrison. And you know that. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Patterson, perhaps we should reschedule this meeting for when Mrs. Chen is having a clearer day. But I was already walking back toward the gym, my mind racing. Something about their whole story felt off, and not just the obvious manipulation of Mrs. Chen. If there really was a problem with the 1987 sale, if Margaret Chen really had exceeded her authority as power of attorney, there would be public records. Court documents. Something more substantial than whatever Harrison had in that briefcase. Inside, Mrs. Chen was already in the pool, moving through her gentle exercises with the focused concentration of someone following a beloved routine. Tom Bradley was stationed nearby, pretending to work on the leg press while keeping an eye on her. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer Beth. Can you talk? Found something important about Harrison's firm. I stepped into my office and called her back immediately. Maya, Harrison, Brock and Associates filed for bankruptcy 18 months ago. The firm doesn't exist anymore. David Harrison is currently under investigation by the state bar for practicing without a valid license. The room spun slightly. Are you sure? Positive. Whatever paperwork he showed you is either fabricated or he's operating under someone else's authority. Either way, nothing he filed with the county would be legally valid. Through my office window, I could see Rick pacing in the parking lot, his phone pressed to his ear. Harrison was nowhere to be seen. I had caught them in their lie, but something told me this was just the beginning. I was still on the phone with Beth when Rick came storming back into the gym, his face flushed and his fake concerned uncle mask completely gone. Maya, we need to finish this conversation. Now. His voice carried across the main floor, causing several members to look up from their workouts. Mrs. Chen paused in her water exercises, her face creasing with worry. I'll call you back, I told Beth, ending the call. Rick, you need to lower your voice. This is a business. Don't tell me how to act in my own building, he snapped, then seemed to catch himself. I mean, in the building that's about to be mine. Legally mine. Tom Bradley was on his feet now, moving casually but deliberately toward my office. I'd never been more grateful for having a retired cop as a regular member. Where's your lawyer friend? I asked, stepping out of the office to put some distance between Rick and Mrs. Chen. Mr. Harrison seems to have disappeared. He's making some calls. Important calls about your situation. Rick's eyes were darting around the gym like he was looking for something. Maya, you're making this way harder than it needs to be. Just sign the damn papers and we can all move on. What papers? I haven't seen any actual legal documents yet. Just a manila folder that your fake lawyer was carrying around. The words slipped out before I could stop them, but Rick's reaction told me everything I needed to know. His face went white, then red, then back to white. Fake lawyer? Maya, you're being paranoid. David Harrison is a respected attorney. From a firm that went bankrupt in March 2022, I interrupted. A firm that no longer exists. Beth Martinez looked it up. Harrison's license is suspended pending a bar investigation. Dead silence. Even the background hum of the treadmill seemed to fade away. Mrs. Chen had stopped swimming entirely and was watching us with growing alarm. Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then his expression shifted into something I'd never seen before, cold, calculating rage. You think you're so smart, he said quietly. Little Maya with her fancy lawyer and her inheritance money. But you have no idea what you're dealing with here. Rick, I think you should leave. My voice was steadier than I felt. I'm not going anywhere. You want to know the truth? Fine. Here's the truth. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but not enough. That inheritance should have been mine. Mom always liked you best, but I'm the one who took care of her bills when her social security wasn't enough. I'm the one who dealt with the nursing home bureaucrats and the doctors and all the crap that comes with watching someone die slowly. Grandma Dorothy left her money to whoever she wanted to leave it to, I said, but my heart was hammering. She left it to you because you showed up with cookies once a week and listened to her ramble about the good old days. But I was the one handling her real problems. Do you know how much I spent on her care that Medicare didn't cover? $17,000, Maya. $17,000 of my own money. Mrs. Chen had climbed out of the pool and was standing wrapped in a towel, water dripping around her feet. Excuse me, she said in her soft voice. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I never agreed to sell anything to anyone. Rick whirled around to face her, and for a moment I thought he might actually lose control completely. Mrs. Chen, we talked about this yesterday. You signed the papers. I most certainly did not sign any papers, she said with surprising firmness. You came to my house with some story about my late husband's debts, and I told you very clearly that I needed to speak with my daughter Linda before making any decisions about anything. You're confused. I am not confused about what I did or did not sign, Mrs. Chen interrupted, her voice gaining strength. And I did not give you permission to tell people that I own this building. I've been paying Maya my membership fees every month since she bought this place. Why would I pay to use my own building? The logic was so simple and clear that Rick actually stumbled backward. Tom Bradley moved closer, positioning himself between Rick and both Mrs. Chen and me. Rick, I said, finding my voice again, I think it's time for you to explain what this is really about. Because we both know it has nothing to do with property law or Mrs. Chen's mother-in-law from 1987. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Tired. Almost defeated. The gym's worth more than what you paid for it, he said finally. A lot more. The city's planning to rezone this whole district for mixed-use development. Commercial and residential. Property values are about to triple. And there it was. The real reason for everything. The words hung in the air like a confession. Rick had just admitted that this whole elaborate scheme, the fake lawyer, the manipulation of Mrs. Chen, the fabricated property dispute, was nothing more than a real estate grab. How did you find out about the rezoning? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Rick's laugh was bitter. You think the city keeps that kind of information secret? I still have friends from my Radio Shack days. Danny Kowalski works in the planning department now. He mentioned it over beers 3 weeks ago, said there was going to be a big announcement in the fall about downtown development incentives. 3 weeks ago. Right around the time Rick had started asking pointed questions about my business experience and whether I was in over my head with the gym. Mrs. Chen wrapped her towel tighter around herself. Young man, I don't understand all this talk about rezoning and development, but I know wrong when I see it. Maya has been nothing but kind to me, and this building is her business. Whatever schemes you're cooking up, you leave her alone. Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, you don't understand the complexities. Don't you dare talk down to me, she snapped, and suddenly I could see exactly where her late husband might have gotten his backbone. I may be 84, but I wasn't born yesterday. You tried to trick me into signing papers by telling me they were about Thomas's old debts. You told me if I didn't sign, Maya would get in trouble with the government. My blood turned to ice. He told you what? Mrs. Chen's voice shook with indignation. He said Maya had done something illegal buying this place, that she could go to jail unless I helped fix the paperwork. He said it would be our secret, that we were protecting you. I stared at Rick in complete disbelief. You told an 84-year-old woman that I was a criminal. I was trying to make it simple for her to understand. You were trying to terrorize her into helping you steal my business. The words came out louder than I intended, causing half the gym to stop what they were doing and turn in our direction. Tom Bradley stepped forward. Rick, I think you need to leave. Now. This is family business, Bradley. Stay out of it. It stopped being family business when you brought a fake lawyer onto private property and started scaring elderly members, Tom replied calmly. Maya, do you want him trespassed? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Beth Martinez's name appeared on the screen, and something told me this call was going to be important. I need to take this, I said, stepping back toward my office. Maya, don't you dare walk away from me, Rick called after me. We're not done here. But I was already answering the phone. Beth, please tell me you have good news. Better than good news. I have nuclear weapons. Her voice was grim with satisfaction. Maya, I did some digging on your uncle's activities over the past month. He's been busy. Through my office window, I watched Rick pacing again, gesturing angrily while Tom Bradley stood with his arms crossed, clearly not intimidated. What kind of busy? 3 weeks ago, he filed a request for public records on your property, not just recent stuff, but everything going back to original construction. 2 weeks ago, he contacted the state licensing board asking about requirements for challenging business licenses. And Maya? Last week he met with a real estate developer named Marcus Webb. The name meant nothing to me, but Beth's tone suggested it should. Webb specializes in downtown revitalization projects. He's the guy behind those new mixed-use buildings going up over on Maple Street. According to my contact at City Hall, Webb's been quietly buying up properties in your district, waiting for the rezoning announcement. So Rick's not just trying to steal my gym, I said slowly. He's trying to flip it to a developer. For probably 3 times what you paid. Maybe more, depending on the development potential. I sank into my desk chair as the full scope of Rick's plan became clear. This wasn't just family greed, this was a calculated business scheme that he'd been planning for weeks. And I was about to show him exactly how big a mistake that was. I hung up with Beth and walked back out to face Rick, my mind crystal clear for the first time since this nightmare started. The gym had gone completely silent, even the treadmills had been turned off. My members weren't even pretending to work out anymore, they were openly watching the drama unfold. So, Rick, I said, my voice carrying across the floor, tell me about Marcus Webb. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because my lawyer just told me you met with him last Tuesday at Romano's Deli. Apparently, you ordered the pastrami sandwich, which is interesting, since you've been allergic to pastrami since we were kids. It was a bluff, but Rick's hand instinctively went to his throat, and I knew I'd hit something close to home. You've been having me followed. His voice cracked slightly. I've been doing my research. Just like Grandma Dorothy taught me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Beth's text messages. Marcus Webb, Webb Development LLC. Specializes in mixed-use downtown revitalization. Currently owns 4 properties within 3 blocks of here. Made an offer on the old hardware store last month that was 40% above asking price. Mrs. Chen was following the conversation with sharp attention, her earlier confusion completely gone. Maya, dear, what does this mean? It means Rick's been planning to sell my gym to a developer the moment he could figure out how to steal it from me. I looked directly at Rick. How much was Webb offering? $500,000. More. Rick's jaw worked silently for several seconds. Then, apparently deciding he had nothing left to lose, he straightened up with a bitter smile. $475,000, plus a finder's fee of $50,000 for bringing him the deal. And you know what, Maya? I don't feel bad about it. You stumbled into this purchase with no idea what you were really buying. That money, Grandma Dorothy's money, it was supposed to set you up for life, not get wasted on some fantasy about running a small business. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Tom Bradley was already pulling out his own phone, and I caught him typing what looked like a text message. So your plan was to convince Mrs. Chin she owned the building, have her sell it to you for what I originally paid, then immediately flip it to Webb for triple the price. It would have worked if you hadn't been so damn stubborn, Rick said. And if Mrs. Chin wasn't so difficult to handle. That was apparently the last straw for Mrs. Chin. Despite being barely 5 feet tall and soaking wet from the pool, she drew herself up to her full height and fixed Rick with a stare that could have melted steel. Difficult to handle. Her voice was dangerously quiet. Young man, I survived the Cultural Revolution, raised 4 children while working 2 jobs, and buried a husband after 53 years of marriage. You think I'm difficult? You haven't seen anything yet. She turned to me with renewed purpose. Maya, what do you need me to do to help stop this man? Before I could answer, Tom Bradley approached with his phone in hand. Maya, I just texted my former partner at the police department. Turns out they've been looking for David Harrison for 3 months. He's wanted for fraud in 2 other counties, same scam Rick just tried to pull here. Rick went completely still. What are you talking about? Fake property disputes, elderly victims, forged documents. Harrison's been running this con all over the state. Tom's voice carried the authority of 20 years in law enforcement. The question is, Rick, are you his partner, or are you just another mark he's been using? The expression on Rick's face told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't a mastermind, he was the local contact, the inside man who provided Harrison with targets and family information. But that didn't make him any less guilty. My phone buzzed with another text from Beth. Police want to talk to Mrs. Chen ASAP. Harrison just got arrested trying this same scam in Riverside County. Rick's name came up in Harrison's phone records. I looked at Rick, who was now staring at Tom's phone like it contained a bomb. Rick, I said quietly, I think you need to call a real lawyer. The next few hours were a blur of police officers, statement forms, and phone calls. Detective Sarah Kim arrived around noon, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who took one look at the situation and immediately separated everyone for individual interviews. I spent 45 minutes in my office going through everything, the voicemail, the fake lawyer, Mrs. Chen's testimony, even playing Beth's recorded conversation about Harrison's suspended license. Detective Kim took notes in a small flip notebook, occasionally asking me to repeat specific details about timing in conversations. Your uncle's in a lot of trouble, she said finally, closing the notebook. Harrison's been running this scam across 3 counties. We've got 12 victims so far, all elderly property owners. Your uncle provided Harrison with detailed family information, property records, even personal schedules for potential targets. My stomach dropped. How many people did Rick help him target? At least 6 that we know of. Mrs. Chen was supposed to be lucky number 7. She paused, studying my face. The good news is that Harrison kept detailed records of all his contacts, including your uncle's involvement. The bad news is that your family situation just became evidence in a criminal investigation. Through my office window, I could see Mrs. Chen sitting in the pool area with a female officer, looking small but determined. Tom Bradley was giving his statement near the front desk, his retired cop experience making him the perfect witness. What happens to Rick now? He's being arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and filing false documents with the county. Harrison already confessed to the broader scheme, but your uncle's local knowledge made all of this possible. Detective Kim stood up, tucking her notebook into her jacket. You might want to prepare yourself for some difficult family conversations, Maya. This is going to be public record. After the police left, I sat alone in my gym for the first time in hours. My regular members had eventually resumed their workouts, but the atmosphere felt different, charged with the kind of energy that follows a storm. Mrs. Chen knocked on my office door around 2 p.m., fully dressed and carrying her swimming bag. I wanted to thank you before I go home, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. My daughter Linda is driving down from Portland tonight. She's very upset about what that man tried to do. Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. Rick had no right. She held up a small, wrinkled hand. Maya, dear, let me tell you something I learned a long time ago. Family doesn't always mean people who share your blood. Sometimes it means people who show up for you when things get difficult. Her words hit harder than I expected. My whole family's going to know about this by tonight. Rick's arrest will be in the local paper. Good families will understand that Rick's choices are not your choices, she said firmly. And the ones who don't understand. Well, that tells you something important too. After she left, I called my parents. Dad answered on the second ring, and I could hear Mom in the background asking who it was. Dad, I need to tell you something about Rick before you hear it somewhere else. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Dad was quiet through most of it, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the timeline or the fake lawyer. When I finished, the silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Maya, he said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment, I knew Rick was jealous about the inheritance, but I never thought he'd go this far. Are you angry with me for not calling you sooner? Angry? Maya, you handled this exactly right. You protected yourself, you protected Mrs. Chen, and you kept records of everything. Your grandmother would be proud. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. Web development heard about today's situation. Still interested in discussing purchase options when you're ready. Very generous terms available. I deleted the message without responding, but it reminded me that Rick's scheme had exposed something else entirely. My gym was sitting on a goldmine, and now everyone knew it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The next morning brought 3 problems I hadn't anticipated. First, web development's generous terms text had apparently been just the opening salvo. By 7 a.m., I'd received calls from 2 other developers, a commercial real estate agent, and someone claiming to represent a national fitness chain interested in acquisition opportunities. Second, the local newspaper had picked up the story, and their headline made my stomach churn. Local gym owner foils uncle's fraud scheme, property values surge in downtown district. The article was mostly accurate, but seeing our family drama laid out in black and white felt like being stripped naked in public. Third, and most concerning, Mrs. Chen was waiting by the gym door when I arrived, but she wasn't alone. A sharp-dressed woman in her 50s stood beside her, radiating the kind of controlled anger that usually preceded expensive lawsuits. Maya, this is my daughter Linda, Mrs. Chen said quietly. She drove down from Portland last night after I told her what happened. Linda Chen Morrison stepped forward with her hand extended, but her smile was all business. M.S. Rivera, I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates. I specialize in elder law and financial crimes. My heart sank. Mrs. Chen, if your family wants to pursue legal action against Rick, I completely understand, but I hope you know that I never. Not against you, Linda interrupted. I'm here about the property issue Rick raised. Even though his methods were criminal, his research into the 1987 sale wasn't entirely fabricated. The keys slipped from my hand, clattering on the concrete. What do you mean? Linda opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents. After my mother called last night, I spent 6 hours going through my grandfather's papers. Margaret Chen, my grandmother, did act as power of attorney when she sold this building to Jim Patterson. But here's what Rick and his fake lawyer friend got wrong. The power of attorney wasn't limited to transactions under $50,000. It was limited to transactions without family consultation over that amount. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. I remember now. There was a big family argument. My mother-in-law sold the building to help pay for my father-in-law's medical bills, but she was supposed to discuss it with Thomas first. Which she did, Linda continued. I found the consultation letter in my grandfather's handwriting, dated 3 days before the sale. He approved the transaction explicitly. The sale to Jim Patterson was completely legitimate. Relief flooded through me so fast I felt dizzy. So there's no cloud on my title? None whatsoever. But Maya, there's something else you need to know. Linda's expression grew serious. Rick wasn't wrong about the rezoning. The city council is meeting next Tuesday to vote on the downtown development district expansion. If it passes, your property value will increase by at least 400%. 400%. The number felt surreal. Mrs. Chen patted my arm gently. Dear, that means your grandmother's $165,000 investment is about to become worth over $800,000. I slumped against the gym door, trying to process the magnitude of what she just said. Grandma Dorothy's inheritance hadn't just bought me a business, it had accidentally positioned me to become genuinely wealthy. The developers are going to keep calling, Linda warned. Web development is already telling people they have an inside track on purchasing your property. You need to decide what you want to do before the pressure becomes overwhelming. Through the glass door, I could see Tom Bradley setting up for his morning workout, completely oblivious to the conversation happening outside. The gym looked exactly the same as yesterday, but everything had changed. What would you do? I asked Linda. Her smile became genuine for the first time. I'd asked myself what my grandmother would have wanted me to do with a gift this big. 3 days later, I was standing in my kitchen at 5:47 a.m., staring at a formal offer letter that had arrived by courier the night before. Web development wasn't just interested anymore, they were aggressive. $850,000 cash, 30-day closing, with a $25,000 good faith deposit that I could keep even if I ultimately declined. The money was more than I'd ever dreamed of having. But Linda Chin Morrison's question kept echoing in my head, what would Grandma Dorothy have wanted me to do? My phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Dad's number flashed on the screen. Maya, we need to talk, he said without preamble. Your mom and I drove past the gym yesterday. There were 3 different construction crews measuring the vacant lots on your block. I walked to my window overlooking Main Street. Even at this early hour, I could see a white pickup truck with Riverside Development Corp. On the side parked across from my building. A man in a hard hat was taking pictures. Dad, it's getting crazy. Yesterday I had 7 different people contact me about selling. One guy offered me $900,000 sight unseen. Jesus, Maya. That's life-changing money. I know. But. I paused, trying to articulate the feeling that had been growing stronger each day. Remember what Grandma Dorothy always said about her seamstress business? How everyone told her to sell the building when the neighborhood got expensive, but she held on until she was ready. That was different, honey. She lived above the shop for 30 years. It was her home. But this is my home now, Dad. I live above the gym. I've got 43 regular members who depend on this place. Mrs. Chen does her water aerobics here every single day. Where's she supposed to go if I sell to developers who'll tear everything down? Dad was quiet for a moment. Maya, $900,000 could set you up for life. You could buy another gym anywhere you wanted. Or I could keep this gym and prove that Grandma Dorothy was right about building something meaningful. After we hung up, I got dressed and headed downstairs for the morning opening routine. But when I unlocked the front door, I found Tom Bradley waiting outside with 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. We need to talk, he said, handing me a cup. My buddy at City Hall called last night with some information you're not going to like. My stomach dropped. What kind of information? The city council meeting got moved up to tomorrow night. Emergency session. Web Development filed an application for fast-track approval on a mixed-use project for this entire block. Tom's retired cop instincts had clearly been working overtime. Maya, they're not just planning to buy your building. They want to buy everything from here to the corner and put up a 12-story complex. I nearly dropped my coffee. 12 stories. In downtown Millbrook. Retail on the ground floor, offices on floors 2 through 5, condos above that. They're calling it Riverside Commons. The city's treating it like the greatest thing since sliced bread, increased tax revenue, job creation, downtown revitalization. Through the front windows, I watched Mrs. Chen's daughter Linda pull into the parking lot. She'd been coming every morning since the Rick incident, making sure her mother felt safe. Tom, what happens to existing businesses if that project gets approved? His expression told me everything I needed to know. Eminent domain, Maya. If Webb can convince the city council that their project serves the greater public good, they can force property sales at fair market value. Which sounds great until you realize the city gets to define what's fair. Mrs. Chen emerged from Linda's car wearing her usual purple windbreaker, but when she saw Tom and me talking intently by the door, her step faltered. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice carrying the worry of someone who'd already been through too much upheaval. I looked at this elderly woman who'd become like family to me, then at Tom who'd appointed himself my unofficial security detail, then at the white pickup truck still parked across the street. Mrs. Chen, I said slowly, how would you feel about helping me fight City Hall? Her eyes sharpened with interest. What did you have in mind, dear? I'm thinking it's time Web Development learned what happens when they mess with Riverside Fitness. The city council meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Thursday, but by 6:30, the Millbrook Community Center was already packed beyond capacity. I'd never seen anything like it, standing room only, with people spilling into the hallway and at least 30 more gathered outside the windows trying to hear. What I hadn't expected was the sheer number of people wearing Save Riverside Fitness t-shirts. Maya, did you organize this? Linda Chin Morrison whispered as we found seats in the third row. Her mother sat between us, clutching a manila folder thick with what she called evidence of community impact. I put one post on Facebook asking people to show up if they cared about local businesses, I whispered back. This is way more than I imagined. Tom Bradley appeared at my shoulder, his retired cop instincts in full gear. I counted at least 60 gym members out there, plus half the business owners on Main Street. Janet from City Hall says she's never seen turnout like this for a development proposal. On the other side of the room, Marcus Webb sat with 3 men in expensive suits, all of them looking increasingly uncomfortable as more and more people filed in wearing my colors. Webb kept checking his phone and glancing toward the back exit like he was planning an escape route. At exactly 7 p.m., Mayor Patricia Hendricks called the meeting to order. She was a small woman in her 70s, but her voice carried the authority of someone who'd been running this town since before I was born. Tonight we're considering Web Development's application for fast-track approval of the Riverside Commons project, she began, then paused as a wave of boos and cheers erupted from the crowd. Order. We will maintain order, or I will clear this room. Councilmember David Park, who'd always struck me as Webb's biggest supporter, leaned into his microphone. Before we hear public comments, I think it's important to note that this project represents a $47 million investment in downtown Millbrook. We're talking about 200 construction jobs and 150 permanent positions once the complex opens. More cheers from Webb's section, but they were vastly outnumbered by the grumbling from my supporters. Webb stood up when his name was called, straightening his tie with the confidence of someone who'd given this presentation before. Mayor Hendricks, council members, thank you for considering our proposal. Riverside Commons isn't just a development project, it's a transformation of downtown Millbrook into a modern, vibrant community hub. He clicked a remote, and a large screen displayed sleek architectural renderings of a glass and steel tower that looked like it belonged in downtown Portland, not small-town Millbrook. Phase 1 includes the acquisition of 7 properties along Main Street, including the current Riverside Fitness location. We're prepared to offer every property owner compensation that's 15% above current market value. Mrs. Chen's hand tightened on my arm. 15% above market value sounded generous until you realized they were basing it on pre-rezoning assessments, meaning they'd pay me maybe $200,000 for a property that would be worth $900,000 the moment their project got approved. We've designed the ground floor retail space to accommodate existing local businesses, Webb continued smoothly. Ms. Rivera would be welcome to lease a smaller fitness facility within the new complex at very reasonable rates. The word smaller sent a ripple of angry murmurs through the crowd. Tom Bradley stood up from his seat. Point of order, Mayor. How much smaller? Webb's smile faltered slightly. The available retail space would be approximately 1,200 square feet, compared to the current facility's 4,800 square feet. And the lease rate for this smaller space? Tom pressed. Market rate for classic commercial space. Approximately $28 per square foot annually. Linda pulled out her phone's calculator. That's $33,600 per year in rent, she whispered, for a space 1/4 the size of what you have now. Mayor Hendricks raised her gavel. Mr. Bradley, please sit down. We'll have time for public comment shortly. But Webb was already losing control of his narrative. Councilmember Sarah Martinez raised her hand. Mr. Webb, your application mentions fast-track approval due to urgent economic development needs. Can you elaborate on what makes this project so time-sensitive? Webb exchanged glances with his lawyers. We have financing commitments that expire December 31st. After that, the entire project would need to be restructured, possibly delayed by years. And there it was, the pressure point I'd been waiting for. Webb wasn't just eager to buy my property, he was desperate to close the deal before his investors got cold feet. When Mayor Hendricks finally opened the floor for public comment, the first person to stand was Mrs. Chen. My name is Margaret Chen, and I've lived in Millbrook for 56 years, she began, her voice surprisingly strong as it carried through the packed room. I've seen this town change many times, but I've never seen anyone try to destroy what makes our community special just to make money. The room went completely silent. Mr. Webb talks about transformation, but some things shouldn't be transformed. Some things should be protected. She looked directly at Webb. Maya Rivera didn't just buy a gym. She bought a place where neighbors become family. Where 84-year-old women like me can maintain our independence because we have somewhere safe to exercise every day. She opened her manila folder. I have letters here from 43 people, every single member of Riverside Fitness. Not one of them wants your glass tower, Mr. Webb. Not one. The applause was thunderous, but Webb was already on his feet with an objection I knew would change everything. Mayor Hendricks, with respect to Mrs. Chen, individual preferences can't outweigh the greater public good. The city has eminent domain authority specifically for situations like this. The room erupted in angry shouts, but all I could hear was the sound of Webb playing his final card. The gloves were officially off. The words, eminent domain, hung in the air like a threat, but instead of the chaos I expected, something else happened. The room went dead silent, and then Mayor Hendricks did something that surprised everyone. She started laughing. Mr. Webb, she said, setting down her gavel with a sharp crack, did you just threaten to use eminent domain against a local business owner in front of half the town? Webb's face went pale. Mayor, I was simply explaining the legal options available. The legal options available to whom, exactly? Councilmember Martinez leaned forward, her expression dangerous. Because last I checked, private developers don't get to invoke eminent domain. That's a government power, and it requires a public purpose determination that this council hasn't made. One of Webb's lawyers whispered urgently in his ear, but the damage was already done. Tom Bradley was on his feet again, and this time his retired cop voice carried to every corner of the room. Mayor, I'd like to know if Mr. Webb has had any private conversations with city officials about using eminent domain for this project. Because if he has, that sounds like corruption to me. The crowd erupted again, but Mayor Hendricks was already raising her hand for silence. Mr. Webb, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I suggest you answer it very carefully. Has anyone associated with Webb Development or Riverside Commons discussed the possibility of eminent domain proceedings with any member of this council or city staff? Webb's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Behind me, I heard someone whisper, he's done. But then Councilmember David Park cleared his throat, and my heart sank. Mayor, I think we need to acknowledge that I did have preliminary discussions with Mr. Webb about potential acquisition methods if property owners proved uncooperative. The room exploded. Mayor Hendricks banged her gavel so hard I thought it might break, but people were on their feet shouting, and I caught fragments of what they were saying, corruption. Backroom deals. Where's the FBI when you need them? Linda grabbed my arm and pulled me close to whisper in my ear, Maya, this is better than Christmas morning. Park just admitted to conspiracy. Through the chaos, I saw Webb frantically gathering his papers while his lawyers looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. But what really caught my attention was Janet Morrison from City Hall, who was standing near the back door with her phone out, recording everything. When Mayor Hendricks finally restored order, her voice carried a fury I'd never heard before. Councilmember Park, are you telling this room that you discussed using government power to benefit a private developer before we'd even voted on their application? Patricia, it wasn't like that. Don't you Patricia me, David. You've been on this council for 12 years. You know better. She turned to the crowd, her small frame somehow commanding the entire room. This meeting is suspended pending a full investigation by the County Ethics Board. Webb shot to his feet. Mayor, we have investors flying in from Seattle tomorrow morning. We need a decision tonight. Mr. Webb, Mayor Hendricks said with deadly calm, your investors are the least of your problems right now. As people began filing out, Mrs. Chen turned to me with eyes sparkling with satisfaction. Maya, dear, I think your grandmother would have enjoyed tonight very much. But even as I hugged her, I knew this was far from over. Webb Development had just lost a battle, but they still had $47 million reasons to find another way to get my property. The question was, what would they try next? 2 days after the city council meeting, I found out just how vindictive wealthy developers could be when their plans got derailed. I was opening the gym at 6 a.m. when I noticed the bright yellow notice taped to my front door, emergency health inspection, facility closed pending compliance review. My hands shook as I read the fine print. Riverside Fitness was being cited for 17 different health code violations, ranging from inadequate ventilation systems to non-compliant pool chemical storage. The inspection had allegedly been conducted yesterday at 4 p.m., when I was definitely here, and definitely hadn't seen any health inspectors. Tom Bradley pulled into the parking lot just as I was trying to call the health department's main number. He took one look at my face and immediately went into protective mode. What's wrong? He asked, jogging over from his truck. I handed him the notice. His expression darkened as he read. Maya, this is garbage. I was here until 7 p.m. yesterday helping you fix that loose treadmill belt. There was no inspection. The violations don't even make sense, I said, pointing at the list. Look at this, improper food service licensing. Tom, we don't serve food. We have a vending machine. My phone rang before he could respond. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar, Marcus Webb. Ms. Rivera, I heard about your health department troubles. What a shame, these bureaucratic mix-ups can take months to resolve. The fake sympathy in his voice made my skin crawl. What do you want, Webb? I want to help. My company has excellent relationships with city regulatory departments. We might be able to expedite your compliance review, if you're willing to reconsider our purchase offer. Tom was close enough to hear both sides of the conversation, and I watched his face transform into the expression he probably used on suspects back in his police days. Let me understand this, I said slowly. You're offering to fix problems that mysteriously appeared right after you lost at the city council meeting. Maya, may I call you Maya? Sometimes these things happen when property owners don't understand how the system works. But I'm prepared to make this very simple for you. $950,000 cash, we handle all the regulatory issues, and you never have to worry about health inspectors again. The number was nearly $1 million. 6 months ago, it would have been impossible to turn down. But after everything that had happened with Rick, after watching Webb threaten eminent domain in front of half the town, the money felt dirty. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. But Maya. I should mention that my sources tell me the health department is planning a follow-up inspection next week. Pool facilities that fail twice in 30 days usually lose their operating licenses permanently. The line went dead. Tom was already pulling out his own phone. Maya, I'm calling Detective Kim. This isn't just harassment, it's extortion. But even as he dialed, I knew we were fighting a battle where Webb held all the advantages. He had money, connections, and apparently the ability to weaponize city bureaucracy against anyone who stood in his way. Mrs. Chen arrived for her morning swim just as Tom was explaining the situation to Detective Kim. When she saw the yellow notice on the door, her face crumpled with disappointment. Maya, does this mean I can't do my exercises today? Looking at this 84-year-old woman who depended on her daily routine, who'd been brave enough to stand up to Rick and then speak truth to power at the city council meeting, I made a decision that would either save my business or destroy it completely. Mrs. Chen, I said, unlocking the door, you're going swimming. If Webb wanted a war, he was about to get one. The health inspector who showed up Monday morning wasn't who Webb Development expected. Her name was Patricia Morales, and she'd driven down from the state capitol after Detective Kim forwarded her the recordings of Webb's phone calls. Turns out, using fake health violations to coerce property sales was a federal crime, and Patricia had been investigating similar complaints across 3 counties. Ms. Rivera, she said, examining the bogus citation while wearing latex gloves, this document wasn't issued by any legitimate health department. The inspection number is fabricated, the signature belongs to an employee who retired in 2019, and half these violations don't exist in our current code. I watched through the window as Webb's white pickup truck circled the block for the 3rd time in an hour. He'd been conducting surveillance since 7 a.m., probably wondering why his intimidation tactic had backfired so spectacularly. What happens now? I asked Patricia. Now we turn this over to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Document fraud, interstate extortion, conspiracy to interfere with lawful business operations. Mr. Webb just upgraded himself from local nuisance to federal criminal. By noon, Webb Development's problems had multiplied beyond anything I could have imagined. Linda Chin Morrison called with an update that made me actually laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. Maya, you're not going to believe this. Councilmember Park hired a lawyer this morning, and apparently he's been very chatty about Webb's other business practices. Turns out the emergency financing deadline was complete fiction. Webb's investors pulled out 6 months ago when they discovered his company was under investigation in Oregon for bribery. So the whole Riverside Commons project was a house of cards built on lies and desperation. Webb was hoping to flip your property and a few others to pay off existing debts from failed projects in Portland and Eugene. That afternoon brought the news I'd been hoping for. Detective Kim called at 2:47 p.m. with an update that felt like Christmas morning. Maya, Webb just turned himself into federal authorities. Apparently, his lawyer convinced him that cooperation was his only chance of avoiding serious prison time. He's confessing to everything, the fake health inspection, the extortion calls, even bribing David Park with promises of consulting fees after Park left the city council. Through my office window, I could see Mrs. Chen leading her water aerobics class with renewed energy. She'd recruited 5 new members since the city council meeting, all elderly women who'd heard about our fight and wanted to support that brave girl who stood up to the developers. What about my Uncle Rick? I asked Kim. Rick's plea hearing is next Friday. His lawyer worked out a deal, 18 months probation, full restitution to the seniors Harrison targeted, and 500 hours of community service. Plus a permanent restraining order keeping him away from you and the gym. At 6 p.m., Mayor Hendricks called personally to deliver the final piece of good news. The city council had voted unanimously to designate downtown Millbrook's Main Street corridor as a historic commercial district, which meant any future development would require extensive community input and historic preservation review. Basically, she explained, we just made it legally impossible for anyone to pull a web development on you again. That evening, I sat in my apartment above the gym with a cup of tea and Grandma Dorothy's old photo album. There was a picture from 1963 of her standing in front of her seamstress shop, holding a grand opening sign with a smile that could light up the world. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my banking app. The gym's account balance showed $847,329, not from selling out to developers, but from 6 months of growing membership, corporate wellness contracts with 3 local businesses, and the unexpected discovery that my little fitness center was now the most valuable small business property in downtown Millbrook. Grandma Dorothy had been right about building something meaningful. But more than that, she'd been right about the power of community, the importance of fighting for what matters, and the truth that real wealth comes from the relationships you build, not just the money you make. Tomorrow morning, Mrs. Chen would arrive at 8:30 sharp for her water aerobics. Tom Bradley would be here by 7 a.m. to help me install the new sound system we'd ordered with our increased revenue. And web development would be nothing but an unpleasant memory and a cautionary tale about what happens when greed runs into a community that refuses to back down. I had the receipts, all right. But more importantly, I had something Webb never understood, a family worth fighting for, and the courage my grandmother had taught me to never let anyone take what's rightfully mine. The gym was mine. The future was mine. And Marcus Webb. He could spend the next few years thinking about his mistakes from a federal prison cell. Some battles are worth fighting, especially when you know your grandmother would be proud.